Hey everyone, this is Dr. Julie Quinn, and I wanted to do a quick tutorial on author and title naming. I think it's really important that as soon as you can, you get comfortable in this class with having to name your author clearly and with naming the title of a text. And the feedback that you've gotten so far, I've said in paragraph 1 of whatever assignment that you're working on, whether it's in module 1, 2, or 3, that you should be naming your author clearly in the first paragraph of any response. So here's an example of that. Imagine our author's name is Jane Doe. This is just a made-up text because I know that students have many different articles to choose from. So imagine our author's name is Jane Doe, and the title of the article is called The Working Class Struggle. In your first paragraph, for example, I don't have full paragraphs here. I just want to show you how you can start it. In her article, The Working Class Struggle, Jane Doe states that. So what we have is the title of the article, properly capitalized. I would use a website like capitalizemytitle.com to help you with that. And let me actually zoom in just a little bit here so you can see my screen even more closely. So Jane Doe, The Working Class Struggle. In her article, The Working Class Struggle, a little bit of a pause there, but we put an article title in quotes and we properly capitalize it. Then we name the author in full right after. This is what we call first-time naming. So in that first paragraph, and this is to prepare you for later on essay writing, where you're going to need to always acknowledge the source of information. Now in 122, you don't have to borrow information outside of the article that you're using. You're not expected to do outside research. This class is about sort of the deep dive reading, critically analyzing an article to tell readers about that article's strengths and weaknesses. Is it a successful argument that the author is making? Is it not, and why? Is it successful because of the data that's provided? Is it not successful because it has an annoying tone? Whatever you're arguing, you just have to be able to back it up with evidence. And the first place you can provide evidence is to orient your readers to the title and the author name. And some of you are doing this great. Some of you are not capitalizing your titles, however, and what's going to happen is that readers can confuse this, even though it says in an article. They can confuse this with actual dialogue from, or a quote from the text. So we use proper capitalization to distinguish the title of the article and information that's borrowed from inside the article. So imagine another paragraph that you're writing, your writing plan, exercise 3.2. And you mention your author by name, Doe. This is called an in-text citation, when you clearly name your author at the beginning of a paragraph. It's a really good idea. You don't have to rename her in full, because remember, our naming rules are, first time you name an author, use full name. Thereafter, just last name, okay? So that's an important academic naming convention. You can see that I named Jane Doe in full the first time, and then I just shift to Doe thereafter. The idea is that you want to imagine each body paragraph as a standalone document. And so if you take it outside of the essay, it makes complete sense all on its own. We at least know who you're talking about, at least in part. But then when you put all those paragraphs together, you make the argument happen, right? So when you borrow word for word content, there's maybe a dozen words in this quote. In American style of academic documentation, you must use the quote mark here. I'm just going to highlight it in yellow to make it pop. You must use the quote mark. If you borrow more than 3 words of unique construction, so here's the shortcut. If you cut anything from a text, you must put quotes around it, and you've got to name your author. I'm going to go more into upcoming weeks as we prepare to draft your critical analysis essay. I have a much more in-depth tutorial on how do you quote and then how do you paraphrase. Paraphrase is this example of like when you put, maybe you borrow one number, but you put the rest of it in your own words. You'll notice that I'm not saying that the 70% data comes from Julie Quinn. I'm saying it still comes from Doe. I didn't name her at the beginning of this sentence, but I want to show that I still borrowed information from her at the end. So since I didn't name her at the beginning, I can just put Doe in parentheses. You'll also notice that the parentheses are inside the sentence. That's called an in-text citation. Both of these, this one right here and this one right here, are considered equal. The difference is this sentence makes sense without it, and it's just tacked on at the very end just to identify where the data came from. This sentence can't go without naming Doe. Doe is the subject of our sentence. She's arguing that. We're using her as an additional element of persuasion. But remember, again, when you borrow more than 3 or more words of unique construction, don't change them around. Don't mess with any of the punctuation. Put quotes around it and clearly name your source. You could do it like this as well, if you wanted to. The quote ends there. That's one way to have that. You can have a sentence that's just a quote. That's fine. And you can put your source at the end every time, but you don't have to name your source in every paragraph. As you learn to borrow more or every sentence, excuse me. When you learn to borrow more information in upcoming weeks, I will train you on how to do what's called signal phrasing, where you can say she or the author instead of, saying Doe in every sentence, because you don't want to sound robotic. But it's really important that you work on proper capitalization and proper author naming. And when you borrow information, even early on in the class, that it's important that you double check that you've always named your author in every paragraph, and anything that's word for word borrowed has quotes and the source named. Don't risk issues of plagiarism. And for some of you, you may have been out of school for a while. This class is made up of a lot of students that have maybe been out a decade or more. That's really normal. But these are the conventions that allow a reader like me to be able to differentiate between what you as the student said and what the source said. I need the quote marks as barriers. I need the source named clearly, and I need to be able to differentiate between the title of an article and the words within the article. I hope this little tutorial has been helpful for you. Let me finally show you one other thing. Let's go to capitalizemytitle.com. I'm going to go to that website, and I'm just going to show you, let's see. Let's try the problems. You'll notice as I'm just writing some fake titles here, the problems inherent in multitasking. That's not the actual title of the multitasking text, but you can see how it does automatically just capitalize. I wrote the small w, but it's whom, the bell. That's a Hemingway book. So you can use this website, and it's called Capitalize My Title, and you can determine whether you're writing an APA style or MLA. It's often the exact same. It depends on sometimes the length of a preposition. But you don't have to memorize those rules. All you have to do instead is just use the website. And it's just about when you name a title, like as the title of your paper, or when you talk about the title of somebody else's article in your writing. I hope this has been helpful. Reach out if you have any questions.